Great. Okay.
And now it's live on YouTube, it says.
Okay, yes, good. Getting there. Oh, fantastic. All right, he's got us in cupwise now. Okay.
Delay, but yeah. Perfect. So we're live
Yeah.
in YouTube.
Yes, it looks good. Just asking Vladimir to unlock. He can lock and unlock the score sheet and the tasting notes area. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's see. Let's test.
All right.
How does your score sheet look in terms of, mine has a little software glitch where some things are not where they belong? Kind of.
I see. I can move aroma, acidity, sweetness. It looks good. Descriptors.
Are you using which browser are you using?
I'm using Chrome.
Okay, good. That I think it works best with Chrome. I'm going to switch to Chrome and see if it works better for me. Okay, that looks better in Chrome. Okay, that works. Good. Okay. Okay.
Good.
It's fun. It's fun software for doing this type of thing. If you ever find a use for it, it's being able to kind of do the video, do the chat, and also have a score sheet like this. It's pretty handy.
Yep.
We used this in 2020. My friend Ryan and I did a cupping subscription service where we did a monthly video like this with all the customers, and we use this software for it.
Okay. So you can put comments on there. Good morning. Okay. Can delete it. All right.
Oh. Bless you.
All right. So, boom. I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Good. Hmm.
From Minnesota.
Yeah. Okay.
Morning.
We'll give everybody a few minutes to show up, and then we can get going.
But that's such a cool idea, because like many people ask like, hey, can you teach online cupping?
Exactly.
Can we calibrate? So
Yeah, exactly.
okay, there are already a few people connected on YouTube as well.
Okay. Well, they should all be logged in on Cupwise, or at least viewing on Cupwise, not YouTube, hopefully. So
If we should already grind the coffee, I think we can still wait a bit, right?
I think we can wait a minute. Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody was asking. So we have the coffees ready and the cupping bowls. I have two because I have like a few beans to grind through between. I got mine, never mind. So maybe if you have the coffee ground already, you can cup it with a lid or something to not lose too many volatile aromatics. I was like, should I do the cupping at home and then grind everything with the Comandante? Maybe
Yeah.
a few minutes.
Trying to work out with Vladimir. I'm having a very small problem with my descriptor bars, but let's see.
Do you have it in shared screen?
No, but he's trying to figure out on his end why this is happening.
Okay. Hello from Singapore.
I don't know what to do. Apparently for some reason, a bunch of people are watching on YouTube, and I don't know. Okay.
All right. So please, people with the kids, you can connect to Cupwise to the link that you got with a package, right?
Yeah, we emailed the link twice to everyone. I want to put a comment on YouTube, but I'm not sure how to do this.
We can just put it maybe in the chat.
Yeah.
Where can we add flavor notes? If you scroll down here, you have the 4 coffees in the right order that we will be cupping them. And you have aroma, acidity, sweetness, balance, and clean cup. And you can just add descriptors. In my descriptors, there's a bar down there. No, from Chicago.
Just one
Perfect.
more moment, Nicholas, then we'll get started.
Guten Morgen von New York. German people connected too, or German speakers. Right. Anyone,
Hey,
any other questions?
Folks who are watching it, do you have a little bar where it says my descriptors at the bottom of the page?
Yeah.
Do you have a bar where you can type in tasting notes? I know Nikolai sees it, but I'm just want to make sure everybody else has that. Okay, because sometimes it's a browser related problem. I'm having this problem. I'll write notes on paper if I don't get my bars back. Okay.
Or if you want, you can just tell the notes and I can add them here.
No, because you'll see once we do this, you'll see why that would be a little bit weird, because everyone's going to sort of take their own notes first, and then we'll compare later. Okay. This way, I don't want to bias anyone with my tasting notes.
All right.
Okay, let's see. Okay, hang on. I think Vladimir solved the problem.
Yes. They're asking if there is a Comandante setting that we'd recommend.
Oh, I generally recommend people use what they use for, like, just slightly finer than what they use for V60 or Kalita.
I see the descriptor, but I can't write anything in there.
Okay. If you can't see the descriptors, or if you can't write in the descriptor bars, generally it's a good idea to try this in Google Chrome, and also just simply refreshing the page sometimes brings that back. If you cannot, if you can't figure it out, don't sweat it. Please have a piece of paper or something handy that you can take some notes on for the flavor descriptors. I don't want to waste people's time trying to solve the technology issues. Most people should be able to see it. A few people might have trouble figuring it out. So, okay, Vladimir, I'm good. Okay, so Nikolai, thanks for being here. Everybody, thanks for joining us. We're going to cup these 4 coffees together today. If you haven't cupped before, I just want to give you a little primer that cupping is it's a systematic way of tasting coffee. When Nikolai, who's with me here from Colombia, when he's tasting coffee at origin, when I'm tasting coffee at home or at the roastery, it's pretty standardized throughout the world. And just trust that we're going to walk you through this step by step, and please don't stress if there's anything that's a little bit confusing. And if you have questions or problems, you can use the text chat at the top of the page. But I want to begin by introducing Nikolai. Nikolai is based in Colombia. He's been helping supply coffees for Prodigal. And Nikolai, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your company?
All right, yeah. Thanks for the invitation first. I'm Nikolai Fürst. My company is called Desarrolladores de Café. It's a pretty long name and it translates coffee developers. The idea was, like, I'm an anthropologist and I didn't want to hunt coffee. I think that's pretty like old school, colonial. So I wanted to work with friends and develop coffees from the farm. So the farms that we're working with, they don't have to be like super crazy from the beginning, but all the farmers are really nice people and all of them are good friends of us. And we like to work transparent, do many fermentation processes, say, okay, let's try to do those anaerobic or submerged in water or dry fermentations. Let's plant different varieties for the long term and develop the coffee from the farm to get the flavors that we're looking for. So that was the basic idea when I started in 2016 with that. And since then, I'm traveling usually once a month to the farms that we're working with, or to one farm that we're working with, doing experiments, tryouts, check out what they need. In Colombia, it's the climate change is tackling the coffee production quite a bit. For example, the last 5 months, it barely rained. So there was a lot of problems with quality. There was, if there's not enough water, then you can't fertilize well, or you need to add water, but no farm in Colombia usually waters their plants. So that was really tough. Now it started again to rain a little bit, so people are happy. And yeah, so
okay,
we try to work with them. And every farmer knows what we're like, what's the price that we're selling the coffees for. We agree on the price, like quality wise, and sometimes also check out, okay, if a client has this or that need, to hopefully fulfill that. For example, with you guys, it has been really, really intense, really strict. I like that a lot. Many people usually, like, they taste the coffee and then they taste, how do you call it, like type samples, and then they get another lot. But you're super clear. We have some clients in Korea that work like that. They say, I want to taste the lot, and if I like the lot, I want to buy it. If I don't like the lot, I don't want to buy it. And I think, like, the communication is super important and sometimes a little bit difficult over here.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, I think as we go, because Nikolai supplied 2 of the coffees on the table, so we'll hear kind of in detail about the farmers and those coffees as we go. I want to talk a little bit about the mechanics of the cupping. If you haven't already, please start your kettle so that your water is hot. And Nikolai has already weighed out the coffee. If you haven't done that, please weigh out the coffee beans. I'm using Barista Hustle cupping bowls. They hold about 170 mils of water. So in this case, I used 10 grams of coffee. Please use whatever amount of coffee is appropriate for the size of cupping bowl or cupping glass that you have. Generally, I would recommend anticipating something like a 16-to-1 or 17-to-1 water to coffee weight. So if you have a larger glass or bowl, you'll need a larger dose. And the way this is going to work is we'll get the water hot, we'll weigh out the coffee. Now we're going to grind the coffee in a couple of minutes. Once we grind, we're going to pour, and then while the coffee's cool, Nikolai and I will talk, and anybody who wants to chime in the text chat, please do. So Nikolai, I think I'm ready to grind. I'm going to flick my kettle back on to get back up to boiling. I'm going to grind all the coffees. And for those of you at home who are relatively new to cupping, it helps to, especially in a case like this, it helps to purge the grinder between cupping bowls. So in other words, I've got 10 grams in this first geisha bowl, but I've also got next to my grinder, I've got about 3 or 4 grams of the same coffee sitting there, and I'm going to flush the grinder with that 3 or 4 grams before I grind the cupping bowl. This way, there's any grounds that are retained in the grinder from the last thing that I might have ground. This way, that doesn't contaminate the sample. It gets you a more pure cup of just the right grounds.
Shall we maybe talk a little bit about your cupping sheet, like aroma, weight, acidity, sweetness, that people know what to expect?
Yes. What I'd like to do is I'd like to grind and then pour, and then because we've got about 14 minutes while the coffee cools, we'll have some time to explain the sheet and to go through the mechanics with people, okay?
All right. So
all right,
let's grind.
Awesome. Okay, and by the way, we've set them up. If you look at the score sheet, there's the Jorge Rojas geisha comes first, the Ruby Churroso, then the San Martin geisha, and then the Diego Vergara. And that is the left to right. That is the same order that Nikolai have our coffees in as well. Okay. I'm going to turn on the kettle, make sure it's boiled again, and now we're going to grind.
Right.
Okay. Okay, we'll give everybody a minute to catch up before we pour.
Four pretty different
Yeah, I'm
origins.
excited to compare them. Yeah.
Huila, Tolima. Nice.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to let me get ready to pour now, and I'll set a timer so that we have about 14 minutes during which we can talk, and we'll do the break at some point. All right.
That's a question about the machine.
So the coffees were roasted on a IMF, which is kind of similar to a Loring in that it's an air roaster with a drum inside, and it recirculates hot air through a very hot burner in order to clean the air as the roasting progresses. And if you don't already, once you've poured the coffee, please take a little hot water and fill a mug with the water so that you can rinse your spoon or spoons with that. And please have an extra cup on the side as well for things like whether you want to spit instead of swallow the coffee, and in case you want to, so that you can, when we remove the crust from the top of the cupping bowls, so that you have somewhere to put the crust. So we've got the 4 cupping bowls. I've got a cup with spoons and some hot water, and I've got a dump cup for spitting or for the crust. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, and I've set a timer for 14 minutes. And in about 3 minutes, we will break the crust. And so the way this is going to work mechanically, if you're not familiar with cupping, should we always measure the water? Filling up the cup should be enough. It depends on the size of your cup. I prefer that you weigh the water as you pour so that you're accurate. So if you have something like Barista Hustle cupping bowl and you know that when you get near the rim, you're at about 170, that's okay. But weighing is always a little bit more accurate. Okay. So during the first 4 minutes, not much happens. You're welcome, of course, to smell the coffee. But what will happen at about the 4-minute mark is we will break the crust with the back of the spoon. And when we do that, it will release a lot of aroma. And that's our first impression of the coffee. So we get a little burst of aroma there. If you want to take notes at that point, you can. And at about 13 minutes or so, we're going to begin slurping once the coffee is a little bit cooler.
Oh, you wait quite a lot. We usually start at 10.
Oh, you start at 10?
Yep.
Yeah, I personally don't mind starting a bit hotter. I find that most people I cup with aren't as tolerant of the hot temperature, so I've kind of just gotten used to doing it a bit cooler. Also, you know, we're at high altitude, both of us. We're at very similar high altitudes, and I mean, I'm at 1,700 meters. I think you're at about the same, Nikolai.
Yeah.
And so for us, water boils about 5 degrees Celsius lower than it does at sea level, and our coffee starts cooler, and it's always a little cooler than you folks who live at sea level. And then, of course, it depends a little bit on what kind of cupping bowl you use, because if you use like a thick ceramic or thick glass bowl and it's not preheated, it's going to take a lot of the heat out of the coffees and cool it a little bit faster. Okay, so it's just about time to break. So what I recommend for folks is use the back of a cupping spoon and gently push aside the crust in order to get the aromatic impression. If you would like, and this is what I'll do, is after you've done that, you can sort of churn the coffee a little bit in order to dunk the crust. And as you do that, you'll get a little bit more of the aromatics. And if you want to take some notes, you're welcome to. It's totally handy. Can the flow speed of the water affect the taste in the cupping? Not really. As long as you wet all the grounds when you pour, you should be totally fine. Okay, so I'm gonna break now, Nikolai.
Right.
All right, for the folks at home, once you have broken the crust on all four coffees, oh, someone didn't get a crust. That's pretty normal with lightly roasted coffees. Surprised you didn't get any, but hopefully you got some. Um, don't worry about it too much. I'm pretty confident these are not underdeveloped, but sometimes very lightly roasted coffees don't have as much crust, and of course, the longer you get from roasting, the less gas there is. So there might be a little less gas, especially if you open the coffee bags before today. And when you clean the crust off, it helps to use two spoons, kind of scoop the sludge off with the spoons at about their equator at the line of the liquid. Yeah. So Nikolai, can you tell me a bit, since you supplied us with the first two coffees, the Sanchez and Rojas Geisha and the Ruby Chiroso, can you tell us a little bit about the farms, the farmers, the coffee, and then of
Sure.
course we'll discuss how they taste later.
So the first one is Milton Sanchez and Jorge Rojas. So Jorge Rojas is a good friend of us. We're working with him since like 2017, I think. He's a coffee producer that started like 3 years ago to buy some cherries from neighbors, process them, teach them what's important, like on harvesting side. And he does all the fermentation and drying work. So when he started working with them, he many times sent us some samples, fermented 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 1.5, 2.5, etc. So this one from Milton. So Milton is the producer of the cherries, and Jorge Rojas is the guy who does the fermentation magic. This coffee was harvested at the farm da Cumbre from Milton Rojas, then brought down to Planadas, where Jorge has his processing plant. He pulped it immediately, and he fermented it during 72 hours in mucilage in tanks with a lid on, dry. So that's anaerobic fermentation, which many times like doesn't make too much sense because fermentation is by definition like an anaerobic metabolic process. So
Yes.
there's the difference of fermentation and oxidation. And fermentation, you can do it either dry or wet, or you can add any gas that you like. So this one is just like pulped, put in tanks, lid on, and then it's dried mechanically. Why? In Colombia, there's a lot of rain and sometimes there's a lot of sun. So climate changes a lot. And drying, especially if you have honeys or naturals, affects a lot how fermented gets the coffee during the process. So with Jorge, we decided let's dry most of the coffees mechanically so that we have control and we can say what's the temperature and what's the time that we dry the coffee every time. That's why he's so consistent as a producer. And he dries the coffee mimicking day and night. So he turns the dryer on for 16 hours, turns it off for 8 hours, turns it on, turns it off. And once it reaches a humidity, depending on variety and the farm where the coffee comes from, sometimes it's 14, sometimes it goes up to 22% of humidity. He stores the coffee for 2 to 4 days. And the idea behind it is that the water, because you dry the fruit from the outside to the inside. If you dry it mechanically super fast, you can dry it down to 9%. But if you store the coffee for a month, it gets wet, sometimes up to 13, 14% again. In Colombia, this is called rehumedecer o devolverse, like getting back. So this coffee, like we stabilize it, and then we finish the drying process, and we feel that it's way more stable and it behaves good, like from super fresh onwards.
Cool.
The other one is from the Lasso family. It's not, they're called Segundo Lasso, the father, Wilder and Heiner Lasso, which are the brothers. They both come from, well, the family comes from Boyacá, but they moved to San Adolfo Huila. And this Chiroso is from the farm of Heiner. That's why it's called El Rubí. The family farm is called La Dinastía. And the other farm of Wilder is called Bella Alejandría. Chiroso is a variety that comes from Antioquia, so the department where Colombia is. Chiroso, it's called because they're like big, weird beans. So a chira is like a sweet in Colombia. It's like a cookie, and it has like kind of the shape and reminded the farmers of Cheetahs. That's why it's called Cheetos. I think recently they did some studies and found out it's an Ethiopian landrace. So like whoosh whoosh or geisha, for example. And yeah, so that's why it has this, for me, Ethiopian vibe blended with Colombia. So you have some aromatics, fruits, tropical, blended together with this chocolatey creaminess of Colombia. And this coffee had an anaerobic fermentation, usually it's submerged for 100 hours. And on the drying beds, there are added some herbs for 2 days. And then they're taken off again. Later on, I will tell you which one it is to not talk too much about flavors.
Okay, very good. The third coffee is a washed geisha from Huila, which we sourced through a woman named Elena, who has a company called Native Seeds. And the fourth coffee is a Java, the first Java that we've purchased. It's anaerobically and fermented, as we talked about, which is always a funny thing, but it's anaerobic washed, and definitely going to be the unusual coffee on the table. We have just 1 minute till it's time to slurp. So I just want to coach everybody that when it comes to slurping, the best thing you could do is take your spoon. Don't overfill the spoon. Even a half spoon of liquid is okay. Try to put the tip of your tongue at the top of your mouth. Try to forcefully slurp the coffee into your mouth so that the coffee sprays, the coffee breaks up into lots of little droplets. What this will do for you is it will release more aroma because the coffee is in lots of little droplets and they'll have more surface area, so they'll release more aroma. And then either swallow the coffee or spit it into a spit cup, and do it a few times for each coffee. Take a couple of notes and then move on to the next coffee. You could always go back and forth between coffees to compare them. We'll take ourselves a good 5 to 10 minutes to do some slurping and note taking. And if you have questions along the way, please text them in. Several people are concerned about not having much crust on their coffee. Please don't worry about that. It happens often with light roasts. And also, like I have a bit of crust always on the coffees here, but also at high altitude, the degassing during grinding and during brewing is more powerful than it is at sea level. So I got a thin crust on all the coffees, but if you live at sea level, you might not get a crust on some of the coffees. Totally okay. Nothing's wrong. Don't worry about that. The timer went off, so let's go ahead and do some slurping and note taking. As far as the score sheet, it's a bit of a BS score sheet. I don't want anybody to worry about it or think there's anything official about it. I would just say all that really matters is that if you use the same standard internally for what's a 7 and what's a 10 on aroma, and you have these scores relatively accurate, you know what I mean is like relative to each coffee. In other words, the one that you think the aroma is the best, if you score that one the highest, that's what's going to matter. Because what's going to happen is when we're done, my friend Vladimir, who wrote the software, the software is going to average all of our scores, and then he's going to unlock the scores so that we can see the averages. And so your scores might be higher or lower than mine, but what's more interesting is to look at the relative aroma and acidity and sweetness and such of these coffees, so we can talk about that. So please go ahead and slurp and take some notes. So for what it's worth, I'm going to do a round where I just take notes on the flavors, and then I'm going to do a round of slurping where I do the numbers on the score sheet because I think it's a lot to try to do all at once.
Right.
If someone asked about the spellings of geisha and gesha, there is we generally try to just spell it the way the producer spells it out of respect for the producer. We don't want to get into the semi-political weird debate people have about how it should be spelled. Can you talk about the difference between
Here's
terroir
also a
and
lot of
expulsion?
we always put right at geisha or geisha, whatever you prefer, how you feel comfortable.
So Nikolai, I don't want to give you a big ego, but I like your two coffees the best in this cup. They are wonderful.
Happy to hear that.
um, yes, so someone asked if everybody can score. Please put your scores. Take your time. It's okay. What will happen is at some point in maybe 10 minutes, we'll lock the scores and then we can see the averages. And you'll be able to see the averages versus your own score. So Nikolai, cup one, the Sanchez and Rojas Gesha. I absolutely love this coffee. Aromatically, I got oranges, peaches. It's very floral. I felt like I couldn't stop writing tropical fruit notes like mango and papaya. And there was like a nice red wine and berries. And there was even like a little hint of banana, which I don't know where that comes from. It's a funny thing. But I felt like,
Longer fermentations.
Yeah. I felt like, the acidity and the fruit flavors are like pretty well balanced. The aroma is excellent. Like it's a pretty full, like juicy coffee I could drink all day long. How did you feel about it, and what else can you tell me about it?
All right. What I first wrote down was rose. Then I wrote down peach. Then I also felt some honey, some melon, some tangerine. I liked the body a lot, and I think it was the sweetest cup for me on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I have notes of like white wine a little bit, like we call it pichitos. They're slightly fermented, but it's not like alcoholic or nail polish remover over fermentation stuff, but it's like super subtle, slight wine. And I also have mango as it cooled down because it got creamier and creamier.
Yeah, nice. It is creamy. It is creamy, and it is the one coffee I gave 10 out of 10 for sweetness. I felt like it was like really well balanced there. So later we can see the calculations, but I would say in an official coffee industry scoring standard, I would give this coffee 88.
Yep, for us it's also like Milton's coffee. Probably I think we would score it 89. But yeah.
Okay, excellent. Someone asked about water. It's helpful for everybody to use similar water. Like in the email I sent, I mean, we recommend using about 30 to 40 alkalinity. Yes, a lot of people use distilled or RO and then add minerals, but no, not all coffee tasters use the same water. So it's definitely a subjective thing. But for you folks at home, if you know your alkalinity, or if you created your own water and we're in similar levels of alkalinity, then we're going to have somewhat similar results. But it's very difficult to get identical results. But I wouldn't worry about it too much unless you're using something like 100 alkalinity water. Then it's going to really flatten the acidity and take away some of the delicate fruit notes. Okay. You want to talk about the Ruby Chirroso?
Right, Ruby Chirroso. So this is dried with lemongrass, and I think you feel it straightforward. So I wrote down lemongrass. I have a lot of pineapple, brown sugar. I have some spicy notes like this. As I mentioned, like for me, it's a blend of Ethiopia and Colombia. So I have cilantro seeds, which is like this perfume-like, slightly citric. The body is not so creamy as the Milton Sanchez. So for me, it would be a silky body. And as it cools down, I got a little bit like pomelo, which is also like citric fruit that also has some spicy vibes with it.
Nice. Yeah, the lemongrass is very potent in this coffee. Interestingly, I would say like in my whole career in the US, like two of the 5 people I think I've cupped with who I think have the best palates and a lot of experience, both happened to have tried this coffee in the past week and texted me to say that they absolutely loved it and it just blew their minds. So obviously, the lassos are doing a pretty good job with this coffee. I got some rose, some lemon, some lemongrass, some lime, So I felt like what this coffee lacked relative to number one, it wasn't as deep, it wasn't as sweet, it didn't have quite the body of the geisha, but it had its own very interesting high notes, like with this lemon and lemongrass, like it more, little
Yeah,
more herbaceous, a little more citrusy, kind of more zing, less plump in a way.
yeah, it's super bright.
Yeah.
I like this a
Um,
lot. Like here in Medellin, the last few months, it was like
mhm.
super hot. So I quite sometimes did like a iced filter coffee with it. And that's like just
Uh-huh.
the
Oh
best
yeah, yeah.
drink.
I could see
Chill on
that.
the balcony.
I will try that. I bet the lemongrass flavor in the iced coffee would be quite interesting. Um, on a sort of CQI SCA scoring basis, I gave this 87.75. How
Yep.
about
I also like
yourself? Where
what
would you?
I would give it a little bit less points. So probably if the first one is 89, then this would be like 87, 75, 88-ish, somewhere in between
Yeah,
there.
cool. Lovely. Okay, let's move on to the San Martin Geisha.
Shall I start with that?
Sure, if you wish. Go ahead. Yeah.
So that's the more like it's pretty floral. I have a lot of jasmine. Also, like in Germany, there's like a white honey that's not so forest honey like. It's more like
Mm.
flowery. I had some orange and red apple. I have a little bit of macadamia nut, and as it cooled down, like lemon and black tea, quite a bit.
Yes. So the two words that we've cupped this coffee, I don't know, 20, 25 times. The two words that come up the most are orange and apricot. Um, Mark always writes down apricot candy, and it always turns out to be the geisha when there's like 30 cups on the table. I got some white wine, some green grape. I felt like your macadamia nut to me, a little nutty usually means that there's Quaker involvement. Definitely not like a yellow Quaker, but more like a pale brown Quaker. And this coffee in particular on the table, I felt a little astringency in my mouth, which indicates that even though we did the optical sorter and we removed quite a bit from this coffee, quite honestly, it still leaves a little astringency most of the time. It's pretty hard to get all of the Quakers out. So that was kind of the detractor for me because the astringency also takes away from the mouthfeel and the aftertaste. So I would give this one 87.25 to 87.5. It's pretty clean. It's pretty aromatic. It's got some nice fruits, but it's lacking the churroso and the first geisha have just this like flawlessness, right? Like uh, we may have different preferences for what is our version of perfect coffee, but like neither one has any weaknesses really. This one I felt the astringency took and the mouthfeel kind of took away from the overall impression of the coffee.
Yep.
Still a very good coffee, but not as I mean the first two are like just too freaking good, and it's hard to compare to them. So okay, cool. And somebody asked about roasting, so I'll talk about that. Bidmar, after we do the last cup, we can talk about the roasting a bit. So we'll do the Java. So for me, this is a very for us, this is something weirder or wilder than most of the coffees we would buy. Um, this had some peach, some orange, some bubble gum, um, some blueberries. It has a bit of like a moss or earth quality, like some slightly
The
herbaceous
aftertaste.
or earthy quality. Yeah. Mm. That's the only thing I don't like about it. I made a pulsar of this before we started the video, and that came out very big with huge berries and like voluptuous fruit. But this cup in the cupping bowl right now is a little bit earthier. Still, really interesting fruit notes. But I would say compared to the other coffees in the table, like I gave 10 out of 10 for a clean cup to the first two cups. And I gave
Mhm.
9 for the San Martin, but I would give this one like 8.5 for clean cup. I would take it down a little bit simply because of the earthiness. Like for me, it muddles the prettiness of it.
Yeah, I have a lot like pina colada. It reminded me like coconut and pineapple vibes.
Yeah.
Definitely also lemon, a little bit blueberry, lychee at some point. And yeah,
Mm.
also like this herbalness, and also like the aftertaste, I think is a little bit drier than the one before.
Hmm.
And for me, this is probably a co-fermented coffee.
It certainly could be. There's enough weirdness in there. The supplier
I'm pretty sure
didn't.
because you have a lot of
Yeah.
like this, if the aromatic is like huge and super intense, and
Hmm.
then you have like some of this, I always call it like the balance issues that those coffees many times have. So it
Uh-huh.
has like the aromatic was pretty wild, but then as it
Hmm.
cooled down, like this slightly earthy vegetable or vegetative, that's for me like this, because usually the infusions, we're also like doing some tryouts with some friends and
Hmm.
co-fermenting. We co-fermented some with coconut, some with aroma, some with natural stuff. And it's
Yeah.
always interesting, but I think those coffees have this aftertaste balance feeling. But it's a really nice and interesting
Yeah.
cup.
It's interesting you said coconut and also the co-ferment because I've had a few, I haven't had many co-ferments, but even though they've been co-fermented with various types of fruit, I've actually tasted coconut a few times in them. And it confuses me because I don't understand why co-fermenting with fruit would make coffee taste like coconut, but it's happened more than once. And now I'm kind of thinking there's something to it. Um,
Well, for me, this co-ferments many times produce also a lot of lactic acidity.
mhm,
Um, and usually, like if you add fruits, for example, many people like the classical fruit that you ferment coffee with in Colombia is pineapple, because
mhm.
pineapple has a lot of yeasts on the surface.
Uh,
So either they blend it, or many people do like part of like chemical flavorings and part of natural flavors, because if you ferment, for example, with lychees in Colombia, they don't grow and it's freaking
mhm.
expensive. So
Right,
um, those coffees would be unpayable sometimes. So,
right.
but that's pretty interesting. Like you can co-ferment, you can, like a few years ago, there were studies that said coffee doesn't absorb any flavors.
Mhm,
But then people found out there are a few sceneries where coffee definitely absorbs things. It's either over
yeah.
drying, or it's more temperature, or more pressure. So that's why
Mhm,
many of those co-fermented are called, or infused coffees are called like anaerobic, because if you do carbonic maceration, or if you just put a lid on it and you let the CO2 generate the pressure itself, the, let's say the protecting layers of the coffee have more pressure, open up, and absorb stuff from the liquid. So it's like um, we tried, for example, with some friends, we did some red fruits, some mango, some cinnamon, and yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think it's not bad to do it. It's just
mhm.
like many styles of fermentation that you can get.
Yes. Two things. Mark reminded me. I couldn't remember who we purchased the Java from, but we purchased it purchased it from a company called Lojas Beans. And also, he says that it's not a co-ferment; it's mosto, which I
Okay.
believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the reusing of the coffee cherry and the fermentation, like reusing of the fermentation water.
Yeah, if
Can
you
you tell
ferment
me?
the coffee anaerobic, like you generate juices,
Mhm.
and like liquid gets out, and you can reuse it as speeding up the processing.
So we tried only a couple of coffees that people claimed involved this mosto, and we found that it muddled the flavor a little bit. We lost some flavor clarity. We lost some of the crisp, clean flavors.
Yep. And many times, like, there are many fancy names for different things, like, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult to understand, like, what's really happening. So
Hmm.
I also tried some coffees. For example, once I had a friend of mine asked me, like, hey, would you use this coffee for a coffee competition? I was like, this one is amazing. It was an Ethiopian natural. And the other
Hmm.
one was like an anaerobic Colombian. And I said, that's infused. I don't like it. And then he asked the roaster who gave him the beans, and the roaster said, no, it's not infused. I asked them, it's like anaerobic, 40 hours fermentation. And I'm like, in 40 hours, nothing happens. Like literally not a lot, especially anaerobically. And after asking 5-6 times to the green bean supplier, then he said, oh yeah, it was fermented with pineapple and passion fruit.
You just have
like,
to ask 6 times.
So that's
I've
my
definitely had
experience
those.
here. Like we do a lot of quality control for many or for a few companies. And yeah, we many times found that, there's nothing. It's just God's hand.
Yeah.
And no.
Yeah. But
it's really nice. I like to have this bright range of flavors that you can offer and feel. And it's so nice for Colombian coffees. And you have like flavors of the world. That's pretty cool. I like you have this Ethiopian vibe geisha, like the San Martin, which has like this tea-like super floral notes. You have this tropical Diego Vergara, which is also like really, boom, you can find in every sip, I think, more. Then you have this blend of Ethiopia and Colombia, and you have like this Colombian creaminess body. Geisha.
It's been interesting. I mean, we purchase coffees just based on blind cupping, and because of that, and because we care so much about freshness, we're purchasing most of our coffees from Colombia. And of course, a lot of consumers and some cafes are like, oh no, we don't want more Colombians. But I'm like, if you want something that tastes like an Ethiopian, you buy the San Martin Geisha. And if you want something that's like wild and crazy, you buy something like the Java. It's like, it doesn't matter that it's from Colombia in the sense that, Ryan said to me 10 years ago that Colombia encompasses all of the world's coffee flavors and styles. Totally. And it's true. And I wish people would accept that more and worry less about what country it's from and more just trust that Colombia could keep you interested and with a variety of flavors forever. And no other country has that kind of diversity of flavors.
We also had once a cupping in Germany, and people were 100% sure that from one farm the coffee was from Kenya, the other one from Ethiopia, the other one from Colombia, and it was all Colombian coffee.
Yep. We have, well, you'll taste, we have 2 coffees we're bringing to SCA. One is a Chirroso, one is a SL28. And if you told me nothing, I would be completely convinced that they were basically Kenyas from 5 years ago, right? And they're both Colombians. And I'm super happy with them. I just, I wish people weren't resistant to buying Colombian after Colombian, because right now it's, if you really want the best possible cup, most of your coffees will come from Colombia.
So we also prepared last week a few more samples for you guys.
Oh, good.
And it's so nice to have such a big variety in the farms that we're working with. That's pretty cool. And you can do so much, like if you take care of the harvesting, we're trying to take more control of the fertilization, that we can lower the Quaker content. This will be like, if we put the fertilizer on now, probably the next harvest in 8 months will be the real result out of it. But yeah, it's really cool to get this feedback and have this like super direct link. Also, like what you tell us, I tell the producer. What the producers tell me, I can share with you, and that's super cool.
I love it. It's fantastic. Okay, really quickly with the scores, because there's a lot of information there. For me, aroma, I gave 10 out of 10 to the Rojas Sanchez Geisha, and the Chirroso, I gave 9.5 to the San Martin. I gave 9.8 to the Diego. So I felt aromatically all 4 were just bombs. Awesome. How about you, Nikolai?
I gave 9.4 to Jorge Rojas, 9.1 to Chirroso, and 8.7 to San Martin, and 9 to Diego Vergara Geisha.
Okay. So again, I mean, because these ranges are random, they don't mean anything. What's interesting is we had exactly the same relative scores, like within our own little bubble of what these numbers mean. So like we gave the highest scores to the first 2 and then the lowest score to the third, etc. That's kind of what's important to be here. Acidity, I loved the acid on the Rojas Geisha, 9.9, 9.5 in Chirroso, a little lower, San Martin 9, and Diego Vergara 9.3.
I have 9.2 in Jorge Rojas, 9.1 in El Chiroso. I think it's super bright, but slightly less sweetness to balance it out.
Yeah, yeah.
8.7 to the San Martin and 9 to the Java.
Okay. So again, perfect in terms of our 1, 2, 3, 4. We had exactly the same order, which is great. Sweetness, which I have to say, I don't actually think of coffee as sweet. I think it's like a weird descriptor because, if you put like, a tenth of a gram of sugar in these cups, then they would be sweet. Like but I think sweetness is like a proxy for how pleasing all the balance is and how you feel about like the overall impression. But for me, I don't think from this angle it gets better than the Rojas Geisha. I gave that 10 out of 10. Ruby Chirroso, I felt 9. I felt like it lacked a little bit in the depth and the kind of fruit ripeness. San Martin Geisha 8.5, mostly because that astringency and nuttiness kind of got in the way. And then the Diego Vergara, I gave 8.7.
I gave 9.2 to Jorge Rojas. For me, it was the sweetest cup. I think for me, sweetness is a lot of like how integrated the acidity is in the coffee. So the Chiroso, I gave it 8.8. The other one, 8.6. And Diego Vergara, 8.7.
Okay, so again, we're in the same order, which makes me really happy. Balance, 9.5, 9, 8.7, 9.
I gave 9 to Jorge Rojas, and the other 3 were pretty similar, between 8.7 and 8.8. Again.
Okay, fantastic. And then clean cup. I felt, I'm maybe being a bit overly zealous here, but I felt like first 2 cups were just perfectly clean. I gave them 10s. And then San Martin, I gave 9. And Diego Vergara, because of that earthy mossiness, I gave 8.5.
I have 9.2, 9.2, 8.7, 8.2.
Great. Someone asked about the roasting. There's nothing special about the roasting. All of them were in the range of 8 to 8.5 minute roasts. Pretty pleasant declining ROR, no tricks, nothing unusual. I'm not sure what else I can tell you about that. Some people noted that they felt like our articulating our flavor notes was really helpful to them because they felt like they were tasting these things, but they couldn't get the words out, and they kind of generally kind of agreed with what we were saying. So that's really nice. How normal is it for flavor descriptors to change when cooling? Okay, fantastic. It's really interesting. We've all had the experience that when coffee is hot, it tastes one way, and when it's cool, it tastes another way. Sometimes defects or problems show up when they're cool, and sometimes they disappear when they're cool. And sometimes certain flavors kind of come and go. So I wouldn't say there's a constant trend about how it tastes hot relative to cold, but I would say that when it cools, the acidity disappears a little bit, and that exposes a little bit of maybe, let's say, like sweeter, fruitier, and it becomes a little bit easier to describe some of the flavors that are harder to note when the acidity is super high. What would you say about that, Nikolai?
For me, I feel the acidity usually gets a little bit brighter. For us, like there are some coffees that we call café concreto, which is like coffee that's from hot to cold, pretty stable. For example, the Chiroso one and the Java one have similar notes from hot to cold. Some coffees evolve. For example, the Jorge Rojas or the San Martin, for example, I got more of this lemony iced tea flavor in the San Martin Geisha. The other one got even a little bit creamier as it cooled down. So I think bad coffees taste sometimes nice when hot and always undrinkable when cold. And really good coffees, they either maintain or improve when cooling down, like evolve.
Yeah.
So for me, especially sometimes for us, when you do quality control, for example, for exporters, we do 10 cups per coffee. And then sometimes you get, for example, the reposo, like aging, like papery flavors. You get them
Mm.
easier when they cool down.
Hmm.
So, for example, a friend of mine, he had some problems with buying some regional. He wanted to buy like half a container of coffee, and he got offers, and they were like in 10 cups, there were always at least 2 to 5 cups, like with nasty defaults. And some
Mm.
of them we just tasted when cooling down, like aging, not fresh crop. And so for me, it's super important to take the time, not just try it hot and say, yeah, the coffee's good, but wait
Yeah.
till it's really like room temperature, because
Yeah.
not all of them, but many defects become more.
Yes. And I would say some roasting problems are easier to pick out hot and some cold. Like if it's a bit roasty, it'll be more obvious when it's hot, especially if there's like a big flick
Mhm.
in the curve. And then baked coffee, I find it's a little bit easier to detect baked coffee when it's cold. And you know, same thing applies to certain defects are just showing up at different temperatures. Someone asked again about so yes, we used IMF to roast the coffees. Um, Someone asked about, okay, this is a good question. Wouldn't Ethiopia have a very large variety of coffee flavors similar to Colombia? Certainly, Ethiopia has a great variety of varieties and flavors, but I think, and Nikolai can speak better to this than I can. I think that the variety of processing methods, fermentation types, yeast or bacteria being used is so much greater in Colombia and in Ethiopia. I think that the processing choices are with a smaller menu, a narrower range of options that people tend to use there. What would you say about that, Nikolai?
Yeah, I would say I think in theory you can have broad flavors in most of the countries, but
Mhm.
for example, in Colombia, I think they're like pretty much advanced in really taking care of harvesting, especially the higher end specialty coffees. In many different countries, I see the harvest and I'm like, what the heck? Like 20%, they
Mhm.
call them pintones, like half ripe fruits. You can see that a lot. In Colombia, you can see that less, although you also, from a few producers, you can see that. Um, in Ethiopia, I think it's getting started. There are more and more processing techniques. I see more anaerobic processes. Unfortunately, like when fermentation gets a little bit hyped, usually people get crazy and do like 600
Mhm.
hours, 700 hours, 300 hours. And I think sometimes it's like, okay, if you don't control the ambience, if you don't control temperature, or if you don't control that it's really anaerobic, sometimes it just gets like nail polish remover, like super
Mhm.
acetone. Um, so that's kind of happening a little bit. So you lose a lot of these floral delicate flavors. But yeah, I think it's a little bit harder also because in Ethiopia, many are really small scale farmers and usually processing happens on processing plants. And in Colombia, people just like from the beginning, since the Coffee Federation told them, had their own mini mill, despulpadoras, and just
Mhm.
produce their coffee on the farm. So that's why
Mhm.
even some farmers are like, yeah, I do the traditional process. And I'm like, what's the traditional process for you? Because for me, traditional is like you pick the coffee, you pulp it, and 12 to 24 hours, then you just wash it. And some people have like super fruity coffees and they say, no, no, I do the normal wash one. So I harvest on
Mhm.
Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, I pulp on Friday and wash on Friday. So you have like 4 days, that's 96 hours of fermentation going on for the Monday harvest, 72 from the Tuesday harvest, 48 from Wednesday, and 24 from Thursday. So people sometimes are not super conscious about that. And when they
Yeah.
get, then you can create a lot of flavors.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, so if everybody can refresh the Cupwise screen, what's going to happen is if you refresh it, you will see everybody else's flavor descriptors in a word cloud. If you
Nice.
don't refresh, you'll only see your own flavors. Um, so hopefully everybody's caught up. And it's interesting, the first geisha, we can see the rose and peach and honey and melon are the biggest words, which means that they were used most often. Second, the churroso, the lemongrass and jasmine, bergamot, berries, those are the biggest words. The San Martin, black tea, honey, jasmine. So that again, just like you said, Nikolai, it's very Ethiopian-ish. And then the Java was interesting because the Java had no dominant words. There was coconut, lychee, sweet, ripe aroma, but there nothing was standing out in the Java compared to the other coffees where there was like one or two words that just dominated, which kind of makes sense to me.
Yep.
Somebody asked, it's hard for me to stay objective in the scoring whenever I like a coffee very much personally. Is there a trick to overcome that? One option is to use a scoring sheet because the scoring sheet kind of the only subjective part is the overall score or the cupper's correction, depending on which sheet you're using. And really, I think it's really helpful to cup with other people because I think that having people with different subjective preferences kind of helps keep your own subjective preferences in check. So in other words,
Totally.
like I have a friend, I cupped his coffees yesterday and then I compared notes with him, and he really likes very process heavy naturals and I don't. And so uh like we had a great discussion about okay, I think like when there's the incredibly intense flavors from those naturals, he increases his scores, and for me the funk that was in some of them decreased the scores. And it's good to cup together or to compare notes on these things because it kind of forces us both to normalize our scores a bit so that we don't get a little bit in our own world where we're maybe not being realistic or maybe being extreme.
Totally. I think that's super important. And your palate, I think you get super used to drink what you're drinking on a daily basis. I feel that a lot in my roasting trainings, that when people drink always their coffee and don't buy coffee from other roasteries, they get super biased. So they forget about roastiness, they forget about like peanutty or baked flavors, or this harshness when the rate of rise flicks a lot in crash or in the crack, or when it crashes and the acidity becomes like super nasty, overwhelming. So I think this is one way, like buy high quality roasters. Not all the roasters are roasting on the same level, but there are so many like really good roasters throughout the world. Grab different bags. If you taste coffee from the US, from Germany, from Denmark, Sweden, Japan, and you can get a way nicer feeling of calibration. For example, for me, it was crazy when I was in Taipei and in Japan. Like many coffees are way more developed than we would do it. Your coffees are slightly lighter than we usually roast. And so it's really interesting. And you get this feeling for, okay, this is their roast style. And I think that helps a lot. If good roasteries, like for example, you guys take your time, you print the labels, you cup every batch, and then you send them out with 3 main flavors, I think that helps a lot, that people can calibrate on that. And as we've seen, like we cup together, I think we cup together in real life, like in Athens, and the flavor notes are pretty similar. Like obviously there are slightly, you say mango, I say peach, but they are both like super sweet, creamy yellow fruits. And that's super important to calibrate with people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My best recommendation for everyone watching is cup with other people. If you can find professionals with more experience than you, definitely cup with them, but cup with anyone. Cup with novices. Like sometimes people who have no experience in coffee have amazing insight into flavor because their palates are naive and they'll say something like, "Oh, that tastes burnt and bitter," but we're a little bit immune to bitterness because we taste coffee so much. But sometimes they have fascinating things to say about coffee. But just cup with others and compare notes because it's so helpful to have that perspective and other people's, whether it's the microbiome in their mouth, whether it's their cultural cuisine, whether it's their experience with coffee. What everybody tastes is different, and it's so helpful to hear what other people taste. Okay, last note. Somebody asked if I'm not happy with anaerobics. No, I like to say that Mark and I are both pretty process agnostic. We just care about the end result being very clean and pretty. That can be done with probably any process. It's just that there are a lot of processes that develop a lot of funk or weirdness that we're not interested in, but that's not to say that those processes couldn't be used to produce beautiful coffee. So we're not too concerned about processing. Last note is Vladimir has locked the scores, and you can see once you've refreshed that your score is in purple, or sort of like a pink purple. And then the gray bars are other people's scores. This is interesting because I've done about 10 of these cupwise cuppings, and this is the most what we call polarized scoring ever. So you can see, for instance, with the Jorge Rojas Milton Sanchez Geisha, the aroma, there's a big bunch around 7, a big bunch around 8, a big bunch around 9. And that happened with all of the flavor components of that coffee, and that's quite unusual. What we usually see is something more like the sweetness of the Ruby Chirroso, like where there's like a agreement that it's somewhere in the 8.6 range, and then there's a few outliers. So that's quite interesting. That I'm a little bit surprised, but it's also partly because the scores are kind of meaningless numbers that we're just kind of using. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Nikolai. Okay. Great. Once Nikolai comes back, I think we will sign off. So Nikolai,
right.
I think we're ready to wrap up. Thank you for joining. It was awesome having you. Your expertise is really super helpful, and we're very grateful to have your coffees.
We're also super happy to work together with you to get like, I like exigencia. How do you call that? That you really know what you want, that you need really put the bar pretty high of green beans, of standards, and that also pushes us like every time, okay, let's get even more organized, let's get even higher results, and we're super happy to work with professionals. So that's really nice.
Well, we're grateful to have you, and
set high.
You're being very diplomatic. What Nikolai is trying to say is that I'm a pain in the ass to work with, but it all works
amazing.
out in the end.
Because, I like that.
Well, I mean, I think we really care, and you really care, and I think that brings a lot of respect.
Yep,
and
totally.
we look forward to seeing you in Chicago. And Nikolai is going to come by our Prodigal booth for an hour. I'm putting a post up in the next couple of days with our schedule for SCA. And thank you to everyone for joining this. We really appreciate it.
Yep, really nice. Really happy to be here. Also, if people are interested to try even some more coffees from us, we will bring them also to the booth of the Coffee Federation. We will be at the Cropster stand. So just text us, and then we can organize and set up or meet, and you can try a wider variety also at Prodigal booth. That's really nice. Happy to see you in Chicago, and
fantastic. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. See you.